Good afternoon, members of the media. Good afternoon, fellow citizens joining us on your various platforms. Thank you very much for paying attention. Thank you very much, members of the media, for coming. A good place to start is when we last met. We were having some convivialities and some drinks. When you sought to have my attention, I did tell you that that wasn't a good enough place with a band playing behind us. And I promised that I would be seeing you today at this press conference. So here we are. Welcome to Dip Center again. Well, ladies and gentlemen, today I want to be very straight, very direct, as I usually am with you, but there's so much riding on information in a fortnight where we seem to have been trying to get at each other's throats with or without reason. I want to begin talking to you and the national community today in my capacity, firstly as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago, head of the cabinet, secondly as the leader of the political party that has been sworn in with the responsibility for the government of Trinidad and Tobago. So I will, those two areas. And I want to say that sometimes one gets the impression that we do not care what happens to the country as long as we get what we want out of the conversation or even out of the treasury. And by that I mean a lot of things have been said in this country in the last week which have been very disappointing. But I want to make sure that where the record of the country has been raised or published, that if that record is not accurate, I have a duty to correct it, to ensure that the record, insofar as it applies to the government or to the Prime Minister, that a correct version exists for those who want it. Because when the world is being told by our newspapers and other arms of the media that certain things are in fact facts, or certain things have happened, and that reportage is not correct, then it opens the door in later days, even in research, for what was wrong to become fact later on. So it is important that if something is incorrect, that it is corrected so that that revision doesn't become the story of the future, because that's what some people want it to be. And today, I waited, when I said I would talk to you on Thursday, that was Monday midday-ish, right? It was about 1 o'clock thereabouts. I hadn't read the papers yet. And I thought after the cabinet, you did indicate that you had some things to talk to me about. And there were a lot of things happening in the country, and a lot was being said. So today was a good day for me to respond to what I'm sure would have required the attention of the Prime Minister. But by Monday night, when I saw the newspaper, because I read the newspapers every day, early in the morning as fast as I can get, first thing in the morning sometimes, because I want to know what the population is being told by others in particular, and sometimes what the government is saying to the population. So I am a papers person, I read the papers. When I read the editorial in the Guardian on Monday night, before the public meeting of the UNC on Monday night, I realized that I had to talk to you today about fact and fiction. Ladies and gentlemen, there's hardly a person in this country who has been here during the last week or who have been paying attention to us from outside during the last week, who have not seen issues of great import, especially since those issues had to do with the whole question of the country's judiciary, the conduct of our jurisprudence, the officers involved, and so on and so on. And some people just took delight in misrepresenting the facts in that situation, but dangerously so. I want to read for you a couple paragraphs published in the Guardian of Democracy, the Guardian Opinion. The headline was "Destructive Contention Among State Officials." Apparently that describes what was happening during the week. And listen to this very carefully. It's now printed, in fact, in an opinion in a major newspaper in Trinidad and Tobago. In defense of recent allegations made against him by the Prime Minister, DPP Roger Gaspard has complained that staff limitations and the inadequacy of new office space offered by the government had stymied the effective functioning of his office. Let me read the first phrase for you. In defense of recent allegations made against him by the Prime Minister. First and foremost, they're talking about what I said at the PNM meeting a few days before. That what I said was not an allegation. I made no allegation against any person. I made a statement of fact about a government tenancy in a private building that was rented by contract for 3 years for a particular purpose. And I also did mention that somewhere between the office of the DPP and Special Branch there was some issue, and I didn't go into any details. But the end result of that is that the building had not been used for over 3 years. And in terms of outfitting the building and paying the lease, taxpayers had paid $45 million. That was in the context of the problem of the destructive contention among state officials. What was going on? Had to do, somewhere in there, had to do with office space. And I draw your attention to the fact, one, that I made no allegation. So it is not correct for the Guardian to say that some allegation made against somebody by the Prime Minister is what caused the DPP to be responding. Because the record will show that the DPP spoke on I-95 on the 8th of March. In whatever conversation he had there to deal with his office and the operations of the office and decisions he made, that was on the 8th of March. I spoke on the 9th. So how could the DPP be responding to allegations made by the Prime Minister? But because they want to say what they went on to say in great detail after, they had very subtly to put me as making allegations and the DPP responding to the behavior of the Prime Minister, when no such thing happened in Trinidad and Tobago. No such thing happened. And I want to go further and say that when I spoke, I was quite aware of what the DPP had said. I heard some of it on the news. I didn't hear the interview. I heard some of it on the news. And it didn't really come across as anything brand new, because I had followed, and I always follow these things that I tell you. I read the papers, I follow the parliamentary proceedings and so on, even when I'm not in Parliament or in the debate. And I'd seen those issues before the Parliament already. Staffing and accommodation. What I had not seen was the written position that staffing could not progress because of the accommodation that was not available. And of course, I'll come back to the point of what the government did. But I simply want to say that that statement by the Guardian, that the DPP was responding to allegations made against him, I reject that out of hand, and it is not true, it is not correct. The DPP handled his stories before he made his decision, He went to the radio station, he made his comments. After that, as Prime Minister, I spoke, and I confined myself very carefully to the singular area where the government had an input. And that area was with the providing of accommodation. That was the behavior of your Prime Minister. I did not touch anything to do with staffing, because that is not a matter that is dealt with by the cabinet, except that if the cabinet is required to change the establishment, to broaden it, to expand it, the cabinet is required to do that, and the cabinet did that. Even so, I did not touch that, I did not mention that. The issue I mentioned was where the cabinet would have been seen to have a role to play in accommodation. And I thought, in a country where people always want to know everything and should want to know, especially parliamentarians, that the public would want to know that you are paying $600,000 a month in rent for a building that is not being used. Of course, I've seen criticism of that, because it didn't suit some people for that to be made public. But I have to report to the country, as head of the cabinet that took the decision to rent the building. I thought a simple statement of fact would have been useful. And I go on. The immediate paragraph after that misrepresentation, is that these matters have come to the fore in the wake of the DPP discontinuing corruption cases against Ramdeen and Ram Logan. Now, I want to say to the public that I have had absolutely nothing to say about Ramdeen and Ram Logan's situation in the court as Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. None of you in the media could show where my government had a role to play in that, or to comment about the DPP's behavior in it. No way. But then the editorial goes on to say, Prime Minister Rowley invested quite an amount of political capital in the case against Ram Logan and Ramdeen. Where did I do that? Other than reading the story in the papers and being aware, like everybody else, that these two people have been charged for stealing public money, where does the Prime Minister, acting as Prime Minister, invest in Ramdeen and Ram Logan's situation? And of course, they go on to talk about ammunition for elections and so on, but I forget that. But the papers go on to say, clearly annoyed by the loss of propaganda possibilities, Prime Minister Rowley released volleys of condemnation against the DPP. So the world outside would know that in Trinidad and Tobago, the Prime Minister Rowley, released volleys of condemnation against the DPP. I ask every member of the Guardian staff and owner, where did I do that? What aspect of my statement, my action, my waking up or my going to bed can be described as volleys of condemnation of the DPP? Today, as an office holder, public office holder, I would say if the Guardian has any conscience as the guardian of democracy and as a newspaper in this country worthy of any respect, that you would apologize for that misrepresentation and what I call an outright lie. Because nothing that I have said or done, one could say, well, you misunderstood it or you took it in the wrong context. Nothing that I have said in a reasonable context, anybody could say that they could identify it as unleashing volleys of condemnation against the Director of Public Prosecution. And all of that has a purpose. Because the conversation during the week, by the time this was published on Monday, the entire conversation during the week is, in their words, the attack on the DPP by the Prime Minister. And I will come to the official opposition very soon. And then, of course, the editorial goes on to talk about, unfortunately, it's the public interests which have been trampled underground while the elephants have fought. That is after making the case that the Prime Minister was attacking the DPP and the DPP was defending himself in response to the Prime Minister's attack. All lies. But then, interestingly enough, in going down a road that has been followed very closely by the opposition members, here this paragraph by a newspaper that has been here for decades, if not centuries. A damning example of how justice is to be pursued is highlighted by the fact that a United States citizen charged in the same Piarco airport scandal has not only been found guilty in this country's judicial system, but has long served his jail sentence. So apparently, this newspaper only know about his. Let me, for the benefit of the public, in the context of the behavior of the opposition leader who followed on from this editorial on the Monday night. As far as the opposition leader was concerned, the persons who had been beneficiaries of the DPP's action were persons who were, in her words, framed by the PNM, harassed by the PNM, charged by the PNM, suffered by the PNM for a hoax called Piarco airport scandal. And of course, this great day in the morning came when the DPP discontinued the prosecution. I want to make this statement again. Nowhere at any time can any person truthfully point to a situation where the decision of the Director of Public Prosecution has been challenged by anybody in my government. Nobody in the PNM, as far as I know, has ever taken public issue with any decision of the DPP on a particular case. So for it to be said that what happened with these individuals being the beneficiaries of a discontinuation of a matter by the DPP is something that is now to turn the country upside down because the government is fighting the DPP over that. Where are the facts to support that? You media point to me one phrase from anybody in my government who took issue with the DPP's decision. On the contrary, the opposition, they won the lottery, jumping up and down, enjoying it. We in the PNM, we said nothing. The DPP had done its job, and we had no comment to make. Not then, not before, not this issue, not any other. It is a fallacy to say, to tell the world that in my country, in the country where I lead as Prime Minister, that the direction, the decision of the DPP has come under attack by members of this government because the government didn't like the decision. Where is the fact to support that? Other than your surmising or your dinner table talk with that, but when you come out publicly and saying so and printing that, where is the fact to support that? And you call yourself what? Opposition leader selling that story to the world that in our country, that is what's happening? It is a lie. And of course the paper talks about a person who was convicted. And the opposition leader talk about Piarco being a hoax and these gentlemen and who ladies and whoever, oh man, I'm glad that they're free because look what the PNM do them, look what the Prime Minister do them, and look what the Prime Minister going and fire the DPP because all fabricated nonsense. But just for the refresher, it's a hoax according to the opposition leader. And Piarco never happened, according to her. It's all PNM. And she said for 2 elections or how many elections We went after the Pandy government, we went after her government, and went after these unfortunate people. So, according to her, Piarco Airport inquiry was merely a witch hunt. Well, arising out of this witch hunt, American criminals from the Piarco witch hunt, hoax, it implicated locals in crime at Piarco Airport. They were named in court, and Mrs. Kamla Prasad Bisesa's government attempted to save them from extradition by enacting and proclaiming Section 34. Fact. The Section 34 scandal, which is the biggest scandal attached to any government in this country, in the history of politics in this country and governance, led by Kamla Prasad Bisesa and her cohorts, was an attempt to have the people associated with Piarco's airport criminal activities not face the court. Legislation was brought to the parliament. Parliamentarians were misled. Government brought it. Opposition and independents were misled. And in the dead of night, on a weekend, it was proclaimed. And on Monday morning, these same people who were facing the hoax, according to Kamla Prasad Bisesa, they went to the court to benefit from what she had put in the court. There was an uprising in this country. I led the march. It was the biggest march in Port of Spain outside Carnival Day, where the population came out and said no. It was such a rejection of what the government had done, that blatant attempt to protect their friends from criminal prosecution, that she had to come back to the parliament the following week, reenact the law retroactively to undo what they attempted to do under Section 34. And she's still here today, nasting up the country's name by making all kinds of spurious allegations against the government in a matter where the Director of Public Prosecution has done his job without let or hindrance from the government of the day. There were plea agreements in the United States before Justice Paul Huck in the United States District Court and the Southern District of Florida. Let me give you the outcome of that, those plea agreements, where people plead guilty and throw themselves in front of the court. There's a fellow called Armando Paz, former chief financial officer of the American company Calmaquip. He pleaded guilty to 12 counts of bank fraud associated with the Piarco issue. Another one called Rene Diaz de Villegas, former vice president of finance. He pleaded guilty to wire fraud and transporting money obtained by fraud. Another one called Richard Lackle of Aruba. He pleaded guilty to structuring the transaction to evade reporting. Another one called Leonardo Arturo Mora Rodriguez of Miami pleaded guilty of conspiracy to transport money taken by fraud. Trinidad and Tobago money taken by fraud. The US government agreed to reduce prison terms for the men, but only if they agreed to cooperate fully in ongoing investigations and prosecutions involving the Piarco Airport case. That matter is going on right now as I'm standing here in front of you. The former Attorney General of Trinidad and Tobago is representing the country and also as a witness in this matter that's going on right now. He has been in Florida since the 3rd of March, I think, and due to be there until the end of the month because the case is going on. Never mind that the silence in Trinidad and Tobago, the case is going on in Florida. US court documents reveal that Calmaquip, one of the major suppliers, conspired with others to fix bids in 1996 to secure contracts. Hillman wrote bid requirements to eliminate competitors. These are facts, history of history. And of course, there are other people whose names I will not call now because they are involved in the current trial. I'll leave that for so. But I tell you, I gave you this reminder So that you could ask yourself, how against this background could the leader of the opposition, a former prime minister, be allowed to tell you now, and you all publish it without any question, that the whole Piarco story is a hoax, and it was the PNM that was trying to go after his political opponents? How could that be? People have been to jail over this matter. I tell you worse than that. Under the UNC, monies have been paid to Trinidad and Tobago in recompense, where some persons would have already paid back some of the money. It was done in silence and in secret under the UNC government. Never made news in this country. So they can come and tell you now that it's all a hoax. It never happened. It's all the PNM going after its political opponents. And we buy that and passing it on as the state of play until it reached the point where the opposition leader is calling for police investigation of the former Attorney General and the current Prime Minister in a matter that has nothing to do with me whatsoever. But it sounds good on a UNC platform without none to talk. You see, one person forfeited $22 million in property and assets and had to pay, hear the verb, had to pay restitution to Trinidad and Tobago not exceeding $4 million. I think the figure was $2 million plus what they paid. That is on the record already. That's why I could quote it now. And a former prime minister and a current opposition leader who was part of the government that was responsible for public money being handled in this way could come here now and tell you what she told you on Monday night. And I could watch it on the news, long newsreel of Kamala Prasad Bisesa attacking the government, attacking me, and accusing the PNM of malicious, baseless prosecution of people. But I want to say one thing to you in the media. How come the PNM could have done that? All these people, especially local people, who are being said to have been prosecuted by the PNM through these charges, where would these charges have passed to get to the criminal court? Wouldn't it have had to go to the DPP office? So when you say the PNM has been prosecuting people who are before the court, aren't you automatically saying that the DPP's office, whoever is the DPP, all the staff in the DPP office was doing the PNM's bidding to bring charges against people where there was no evidence to charge them? Isn't that what you're saying? Because that is what self-appointed senior counsel, former Prime Minister, opposition leader Kamala Prasad Bisesa is telling the world. And I could tell you to the contrary, that nowhere in those proceedings about who should be charged, what they should be charged for, who should be let go, nobody could point to me, anybody in my government or in the PNM political party that I lead, as having directed those actions. They would all have been done in the normal proceedings of the normal day's work in the Office of the Director of Public Prosecution. And when you add that to the fact that I said earlier on, that nobody could point to me a comment made or an action taken by the government about the decision of the DPP, then you can understand why I can say here today, without fear of contradiction, there is no attack on the DPP in Trinidad and Tobago by the government of Trinidad and Tobago. And there's no attack on the DPP by the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. So when Basdio Pandi comes out to have a few drinks with us, he must have had the drinks already when he gets up and says that the Director of Public Prosecution is going to be crushed by the government. Absolute hogwash. Nonsense. And I will not stand here quietly and allow former Prime Ministers of the UNC who are responsible for this Piarco scandal to come and talk that nonsense in the public domain and have it go unchallenged. I will challenge it every time, because I've been doing this long before I was Prime Minister. I was the one who took the Piarco airport matter to Parliament. I was the one who told you that door cost $96,000 in Piarco airport. I was the one who told you that NIPDEC was given the opportunity to award the contract, and they awarded the contract in violation of NIPDEC tender rules. NIPDEC had published printed tender rules, and when the tender rules were seen to be violated because they were supposed to go out for tenders, meaning inviting many persons to bid, they gave it to one person, and then they went and changed the tender rules to say that singular equals plural and male equals female. So when they did not comply with the tender rules to have tenders, the tender now qualified because they changed the tender rules. That is what happened under the UNC in this country. And as fate would have it, I am here now as Prime Minister, and I have to watch Mr. Kamla Prasad Bisesa try to turn all of this on his head on a Monday night and tell you that the problem you're facing is a Prime Minister who wants to be a dictator, and she will not allow the country to become a dictatorship. Well, madam, that's a good assignment you're giving yourself. But I will not allow the country to become a kleptocracy. So we both have our assignments. I wish you well with the easier one, because there's nobody in Trinidad and Tobago on any course for any dictatorship. But the record will show that the kleptocracy was at work. And they're in front of the court now, some been to jail, and then they come and tell us that Piarco was a hoax. Where are we living? How could we tolerate such nonsense from people who have a lot to explain, waiting in the wings? And they don't care that by making statements like that, lying about the behavior of the government, lying about the DPP being under attack, that is creating an image of our country in the public domain, in the national circles, that is what Trinidad and Tobago is like. We are not like that. Our country is a decent, democratic country where the rule of law prevails and the government does not determine who goes into prison or who doesn't go into prison. That is my country. I have more interest in this country than my own. And I know that this country has to be a place where all of us fight equal space. And therefore we have to be interested in a lot of things that goes on in this country. They are only interested in the treasury. That's why they all are in this situation today. And the party I lead have no requirement to defend anybody. But on the contrary, those who lead people who have conducted criminal actions against the state, they have a reason to want to do things to protect their friends. Show me the PNM, show me the PNM equivalent to Section 34. Show me an Attorney General of the PNM going before the court and telling the court, using the Office of Attorney General, telling the court, do not act in a particular way to bring about extradition, because the matters are about to be imminently dealt with in Trinidad and Tobago. That was 11 years ago. Imminent. 11 years ago. Who did that in this country? You show me the PNM equivalent. Show me in the PNM a whole group of people on charges for criminal conduct. You know, one member of the cabinet of that lady is before the court still for attempting to pervert the cause of justice. While that is a fact, she is fabricating stories and asking the police to go after Rowley and Faris on fabricated nonsense, when in fact one of her cabinet members before the court and another one is a witness in the matter for the state for attempting to pervert the cause of justice. And these things are published without challenge. Without challenge. So if I don't object to it, the unchallenged statements, as ridiculous as they are, will become the reference point of what is true in this country. I never expected to have to come back to this issue after I spoke last week, Thursday, at the PNM meeting. I didn't attack anybody. I alerted the public to the fact that there was a building that was being rented. As a matter of fact, the building is being rented month to month now. So we have to determine, what do we do with it? We've done everything that we could have done with it to make it usable. The landlord has come in, and as fate would have it, the landlord's final position came the very same week, just a few days before this whole matter blew up, with respect to the discontinuation of the cases. But of course, very many people who don't know very much start putting 2 and 2 together and getting 11. Right? So, this week of talking about attack on the DPP and wanting to interfere in the DPP's office, the opposite is the truth. I can tell you that the government that I have led, what we have been doing is solving problems. That's how we kind of focus the government's attention on public interest matters. There are a lot of problems in the country, and we set out to solve them. That is why I could point to you in the whole question of the administration of the law in this country, the judiciary, of which the DPP is a part. We set about, you were hearing that there were not enough judges, and we set about to do that. We expanded the establishment. We ensured that we quickly completed the parliament, put the parliamentarians in the parliament, and gave the judiciary 13 courts in the waterfront. All civil matters are now down at the waterfront. 13 courts, where there are judges on benches, masters in courts, and so on. The court is functioning. And what that did, why it was done that way in such great haste, we now left the entire Hall of Justice for criminal matters. So the whole question of space to conduct the courts on criminal matters, that's how we dealt with it. We focus on subsets with the family court, the children's court. As I speak to you now in San Fernando, we are months away from a brand new family court in San Fernando, because the government exchanged property with the Sisters of Clooney. We took the building and we are converting it into modern court space for the family court of the Southland. That's what we've been doing. Buildings falling down, President's house falling down in the country, we fix all of it. We're doing it with water, we're doing it with education, we are solving problems. So the DPP office, and it wasn't last week we heard about that, you know. It was before the parliament, saying that there were problems with space. And that's why the cabinet moved with rapidity under the Presdy, which is the Department of the State that deals with rental of property. And having rented the property, security considerations arose. Those were addressed in a reasonable way. And I've seen it said in some quarter that special branch say something and that is law. But let me just say something. Special branch doesn't create the law or even common sense in this country. They make assessment for clients and then they make recommendations. So that recommendation that was made about that building in the context of special branch is a recommendation. And then the decision makers will respond to recommendations and make them as and when they're required. Not to mention, you know, common sense and cost and so on. I moved into this building here. As Prime Minister, I occupy the building at the back. There's a residence at the back here. And it wasn't being used, as you know, as the Prime Minister resident. It was a boudoir of some kind. But when I became, as a matter of fact, it was said by the last Prime Minister before me that it was going to be used as a home for battered women. That's what we're dealing with. So when I became Prime Minister, I immediately said that as Prime Minister, I will occupy the building and function from there. And that's what I done. And that being so, special branch had to do, or they did a special branch security assessment. If there was a standard security situation around, they wouldn't have to, but they came and they did it. And of course, there was one recommendation that said that the Prime Minister can't pass over here to come in. Special branch recommendation, or special services and for the defense forces involved and so on. Persons come, security experts, and they look at it and they make a recommendation, or they raise an issue that the Prime Minister is exposed to somebody who could go up by the Hilton and stay up there and, as a sniper, shoot the Prime Minister when he comes in through this building, using the entrance. Well, what do? Don't use the building? That wasn't a feasible option. build a tunnel to come in. That wasn't feasible either. Build a shed, bulletproof shed on top to cover the whole road. That wasn't feasible. Of course, I could use the other entrance, because there's another entrance. And of course, I had to cut down all the trees around that entrance, all the trees around the Boy Scouts headquarters, cut down all of them, and all the trees in St. Anne's around, because somebody could go up in the tree with a rifle and do the same thing. Now, that's the context in which you have to take these things. I'm not saying that you don't take security on board. I mean, I do that all the time. But there comes a point where you have to decide what is feasible, what is reasonable, and what is affordable. Those are considerations. But then, when you reach the point where you rely on, what is being said to you by your office holders, one has to think very deeply as to where we are. Because former Prime Minister Pandey, very good friend of mine, former colleague for a long time, somebody I've worked with, and when he talks about the DPP will be crushed by the Prime Minister, I have to ask, what exactly is happening with the government, by the government, from the government, to cause that to be a sensible statement? Today I want to tell the population that nothing is further from the truth. There is no action of the government, no intention of the government to interfere with the DPP's work in his office. So all those who are speculating that what you have seen is something to do with the government and whoever else wanting to get rid of the DPP, we have no interest in that. Except we want to know that the office of the DPP, the job is going on the way it ought to go on. And that the DPP can rely, whoever is in that office, can rely on 110% support from the government of Trinidad and Tobago, where the cabinet is involved, to contribute to that work. That's what the history will show. And that is why, before this whole thing erupted 2 weeks ago, in the last month, I've actually met with the Attorney General right here. One of the issues we dealt with, as fate would have it, was knowing that that office of the DPP has the constraints of getting the quality of staff that he would require to prosecute. You can't pick up people off the street and put them in DPP office. Good lawyers are already in their private practice and not going to come and work for the government's pittance. Out of law school, hot and sweaty behind the ears, you're not good enough to go and carry on no case. So the bulk of the DPP's work in the court on matters, especially major matters, will have to be done by certain experienced lawyers. And what did we do? We sat down and we discussed that maybe the time has come for us to look outside of Trinidad and Tobago, to bring in, whether it's 6 or 8 or 10 or 12 lawyers, to put them in the DPP office where they will arrive with the necessary experience. And because I know how these things go, I instructed the Attorney General, as after we agreed that this is a direction that we should go, I said, but take no action until you have spoken to the DPP. This was about a week or two before all of this became public. And the government stands ready. I even advised him, and I think he had done something on that already, talk to the Commonwealth Secretariat and ask them, indicate to them our intention to look in the Commonwealth for people who can come and contract and support our DPP office. That's what the AG was working at. So when I hear people telling about the Prime Minister has some scheme to remove the DPP for some plot, and then what is the plot? The plot, according to the opposition, the plot is that the Prime Minister is afraid of the DPP. Those are her words. Well, let me just say to you, the media, as Prime Minister, as leader of the PNM, I have nobody whose interests I am to protect that will cause me to be afraid of the office of the DPP. That problem lies with the leader of the UNC. Because every time they see a motor car passing with a blue light flashing, or they hear somebody say good morning and knock on the door, they think it's the police. We don't have that problem in the PNM. And what they're trying to do is to prevent the government from going after white-collar crime. They believe that if they create enough manima, make enough allegations, that the government will back away from what we are engaged in, which is the commitment to pursue white-collar crime in Trinidad and Tobago. I can tell you this evening, the government remains unshaken. We will continue where there's evidence, where there's a basis for investigation, we will investigate. Where there's evidence for prosecution, we will find that evidence if we find it, and we make it available to the police and let the work go down that road. The cabinet has no function after that. We will continue to use the Mutual Legal Assistance Treaty to get assistance from our friendly countries abroad where there's information and evidence about assets stolen in Trinidad and Tobago by nationals of Trinidad and Tobago and others. We will pursue it along legal lines without let or hindrance. Because this whole question of dealing with white-collar crime, we know we cannot count on the UNC for that. Since we have one of the commitments we made coming into the election in 2015 was to enact in this country whistleblower legislation. That's one of the first things we did. And we took it to the parliament and it went to a committee. I think we had a debate on that in February 2020. In February, it went to committee. And of course, like everything else, found no support from the UNC. You look around the world, numerous countries around the world, in the Commonwealth, have whistleblower legislation. We factored ours against the Jamaican and probably the Australian and a couple others, and came to the parliament with legislation. The UNC want no part of it. Eventually, we had to bring the bill to the parliament. The report came to the parliament, and of course, a debate was taking place. All the government persons to date are in support of it, and of course, the UNC is opposed to it. It requires a special majority. We waited, and we gave them time to cogitate over it and to reflect and so on. And I can tell you, in a matter of a few weeks, we'll go back to the parliament and we'll have to restart the debate because it went over. It was saved from one session to the other. So we have to restart the debate. But what had gone before can still form part of the discussion going forward. I give you the commitment that in the next couple of months or so, the government will go back to the parliament, knowing that we do not have the votes to pass it in the PNM, that we require opposition support. And we'll ask for their support again. And you, the population, will determine who wants information about wrongdoing so that you can prosecute it, not just about Piarco or I.A.N or in general, because the crimes that are committed in this country, whether it is murder, stealing money, beating children, abusing wives, somebody always knows who did what. And what whistleblower legislation does, it allows those who know to speak about it to the authorities with some significant element of protection. Why would the opposition not want that legislation on the books in Trinidad and Tobago? Why? When you see them, ask them why they didn't tell you that monies were paid by people in restitution abroad for money stolen in Trinidad and Tobago. But that shouldn't surprise you. There's nobody in my cabinet that has issues with the criminal department of the state. None. There was one issue raised about Marlene from the Manning government. It was raised and re-raised and re-raised, and of course, Marlene was removed from the cabinet. That enthusiasm seemed to have been up, the enthusiasm. I hear people now saying, some of them same people saying, no, I should not have said anything about the building that we have rented. What's the problem with that? Since when you don't want to know what's happening in the country? And if somebody had asked a question in the parliament, what kind of answer do you think they were going to get? Suppose somebody in the opposition had asked a question about that building. What answer do you think you were going to get? So these convenient arguments are to be seen for what they are. And the behavior of the opposition in staining the country's image by talking about, for example, our opposition leader, former Prime Minister, she is now, well, she's bosom buddy with people in the parliament who shouldn't be there at all, who the police looking for, right? But to come and be talking about Nelson, as though Nelson is some hero in Trinidad and Tobago, I want to tell the opposition leader, Vincent Nelson is no hero in this country, so stop talking about Nelson Gate. Vincent Nelson is a Jamaican Englishman who came to Trinidad and Tobago for reasons best known to him and volunteered his information to the authorities here about monies that he and other people in Trinidad and Tobago were stealing from the public. That is the long and short of the whole story. So whenever you hear the UN talk about Nelson Gate and talking about Faris, the Faris part is the late part. They have no interest in the early part. The early part is, we only know about Nelson because Nelson came here, went before a court, gave chapter and verse about stealing public money in this country with the assistance of other people. He got himself arraigned, got himself convicted and sentenced, and somehow the opposition leader wants us to forget that. And her interest is calling on the police to go after Rowley and Faris. And you know something? Nelson calling for your money, and when Nelson comes for your money, Nelson could ask for whatever he wants. The one thing he can't do is go in the court and erase what is there. Convicted of criminal conduct in association with others. And the opposition leader may want to pay attention to that part, because those histories are not going to be written by her. This thing about behaving as though somehow, and I'll tell you right now, this government has no fear of anything that Nelson has to do. The court is there for all of us. Come and make your claims there if you want to. When that is done, the government will come down and defend the public interest. That's all. And they drag that rubber band, stretch it until it becomes a hair's breadth to the president's office, that the new president has been put in office to grant Nelson pardon. Just stretching the lies from one level to another, and she does not care who she tarnishes in the process. Even the presidency, even before it was 1 day old, talking about person going to the office. That is what they will do. I want to ask you all in front of me here, members of the media, and those of you listening to me, you think anybody, any of them, anybody could have come to me and tell me that they want me to go to the parliament and pass a law with a clause that would give them an escape hatch from the court? You think anybody in this country could have put God out their thoughts and come and put that to me? Far less to have it acted upon? And those who have done that are still here looking for office in this country and tarnishing the country's name, tarnishing the Prime Minister's office, tarnishing the Attorney General's office, and talking about she calling on police to go after Rowley. She called me a wajang. All I could say to her is that I could live with that every day. The one thing I wouldn't be able to live with is to be called a thief. You have any questions?
So good afternoon. Akash Samaru, Guardian Media. Fortunately, I don't have...
Guardian Media, you read that?
I don't have any apology for you today, but I do have some questions.
Yeah, let me hear them.
Right, so you said in Barataria that you were responding to the DPP's interview on I-95 with facts. Now, you don't often talk about the DPP's business in public. So when you do, we take notice. But my question to you was a public political platform, a forum known for pecan allegations and, as you said, statements. Was that the best place to address that issue given the nature of the DPP's office?
That is my decision, and always will be. What I say where I say it is my decision. I don't see if I'm talking to citizens and broadcasting it live to everybody, because those meetings are carried live to every citizen, home and abroad. There's no special place. It was depending on the issue. We had in front of us in the country an issue where it was said by no less a person than the DPP that the criminal justice system is about to collapse. And if you believe that as Prime Minister of this country, hearing that statement in the public domain, and the Prime Minister will just ignore it, because I'm sure you would have been the one to come to ask me the question if I didn't hear what was said by the DPP. Understand? That is what I responded to. A situation where it was in the public domain, put there by authority, that the criminal justice system is about to collapse. And why? Because of matters to do with accommodation and staffing and so on. As I pointed out to you earlier on, I confined myself to the accommodation, which is where the cabinet had a role. So don't come and tell me that there's a special place to raise particular matters. There was no reason why it couldn't have been raised there. As a matter of fact, when we speak at this PNM forum, we speak in front of the whole country. Party members might come to this venue, but what is said is deliberately broadcast live and direct to the world. So I don't know what the problem is with telling that to the country from that forum. And it was not specially about the DPP, because you're still holding on to that. To say what the cabinet had done and what the outcome had been is not an attack on the DPP. It's a statement of fact. It is not an allegation. And it was not done after I said it, and then the DPP came and responded. I was responding to what was said before, and that makes a big difference there. Big, big difference. And if you want to go down that road, you have the files. Show me one instance where I did or anybody in my government ever take issue with a decision of the DPP in any case.
Well, the DPP did respond to your statements in Barataria by saying, seems to me that a response is called for, and accordingly I am seeking the advice of people wiser than I am. Have you spoken to the DPP?
That is the DPP. I mean, I don't speak for the DPP, and I'm not going to engage you on that. I have not. No. I don't normally speak to the DPP because, as a matter of fact, contrary to what you hear the former Prime Minister, Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bisesa, saying about the DPP, I have kept my distance very far from offices that are deemed to be independent, right? Because I know if you hear me talking to the DPP in a restaurant or in his office, or if you see me going to his office, that will make news for a month, right? So I rely on the Attorney General, this one and the one before, to be the liaison between the government and the office there. And I know that the AGs, this one and the one before, have that line of talk. And if I need to find anything out from there, I don't call the DPP, I don't go to him. You know, I go through the Attorney General to find out what is going on. Insofar as
You did speak with the DPP a couple of days later. Can we find out what happened in that meeting?
I can't answer that because I'm not the AG. If you want, you can talk to the AG about that sometime, and I'm sure he'll be happy to talk to you along the way. Not now. You will have your own meeting to do that. No. This is my meeting. This is my press conference. You have to talk to me, right? Because what has been said and the lies that have been published there were aimed at the office of the Prime Minister to tarnish the country's behavior in the international eye. That's what I'm dealing with today.
Prime Minister, you mentioned that the building is still being rented on a month-to-month basis. Still rented to whom?
Well,
I mean, to be used by
the government. Well, that is why I raised it that day when I raised it, because we have a situation. We rented the building for 3 years for a particular purpose, right? There's a government department called PresD, right? That handles all government rentals and negotiations with landlords and so on. The 3 year has expired, and the purpose for which the building was rented has not been it has not been utilized for that purpose. The building is still held on a month-to-month. So the government now has a decision to make. If the DPP does not go into the building, the government has a decision to make. And I think you would like to know that. What do? We spent millions outfitting the building, not just the renter. You outfit the building for use as a public, as an office to suit. The contract is up. The landlord could walk away now and say, thank you very much, I mean, thank you for the millions, I go and mine chicken in the building, I don't know. Or, because we have spent those millions to outfit it, do we have appropriate use, alternative use for the building, and can the landlord and the government come to an agreement for that? That's what we are. That's the point I was making on that day. We have this situation, and I've seen it said that that was, you know, nonsense. Figure that. You're all about Prime Minister attacking DPP and bashing DPP and going after the DPP to get him fired and all kind of nonsense. That was the story. When in fact the story is, what does the government do now? The cabinet will deal with that. That's a cabinet decision. That's what we have a cabinet for. We will have to decide now, do we continue in a lease arrangement, a new lease with the landlord for another purpose to get the benefit of what we put into the building, or do we walk away and leave it $45 million with the landlord and never having used the building? And I tell you something else too. Before all this bacchanal came in the public domain, this was a matter of great concern to me, to the point where I have asked in government quarters to look across the government and see where this thing has been happening, because you all may remember, this happened with One Alexander Place, where for 5 years and more, under two governments, a building was rented and remained unoccupied, and then I'm discovering in the public service, it is not the first time that happened. So right now, as Prime Minister, I am dealing with that issue. But unfortunately, it came to the public domain in the way it came, and you all think that is, as these ne'er-do-wells are saying, is something between the Prime Minister and the DPP. This is a serious problem in the public domain, and my colleagues will tell you. I've raised it before. This whole question of government rental has to be looked at in a very serious way. Money hard to get, money hard to come by. That is why this government has spent so much time and effort dealing with this whole question about rentals. First, we brought the rental rates down. That's the first thing we did. We negotiated every rental that come up, we negotiate. Because we are saying the government is the biggest landlord in town, we must have a bigger say in the pricing. Right? In a few months' time, out the road there, we'll open the Ministry of Health building, built during a pandemic, during a period of scarce resources. For the first time, the Ministry of Health and all its appurtenances will be in one building owned by the state. We have just authorized UDCOT to commence proceedings to construct a building for the Ministry of Social Development, which is now in rental premises that are substandard. And we are doing that on the old Printry site. That's what this government has been doing. So when governments that accomplish nothing, who spend all the time bad-mouthing people, right? We have been fixing some of the country's problems, not all, but we're fixing them as we are able to, 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 4 by 4. So the issue before us now on this building is, what do we do? And the cabinet, you'll hear in the next few days or weeks that the cabinet has decided to do X, Y, Z. We have asked that the building be occupied because the building cannot, no further improvement can be made on it so as to change any of its status, and that's what it is.
When the building was selected by public administration, did the DPP signal an objection or attach conditions? And at what point did the special branch concern emerge? Was it after you all entered into this rental contract, or did it come after?
I don't have those fine details in front of me, except to say, at every step of the way, we were at the level of the cabinet aware that, one, the building was deemed suitable for the purpose, and it was on that basis, after it was cleared by Presby for that purpose, that you would have entered into a contract with the landlord. Subsequent to that, we heard of issues to do with security, because someone went and looked at the security aspect and certain recommendations were made. Those recommendations required interventions. Those interventions were made. And all along, the cabinet is expecting that this problem is solved, then we're hearing it is not solved because there are other problems, and the final problem was the one where it came to this question of a construction on the building of a wall, and we had to wait to hear what the engineering would have said to the landlord and what the landlord said to us, the tenant, and in the end the landlord said no. And that just happened to have come up the very said week that all of this bacchanal started. The landlord's position came in writing. It must have been a few days before.
Yeah, late February.
Late February. The landlord took a position that what was being recommended to be done on the building, which some people think was unnecessary, some think was necessary. But the bottom line is, even if we want to do that, the landlord said no permission is granted for that. So that created a situation where the government must now decide, what do we do? Right?
But as a matter of government policy, do you think the security assessment should have been done before the decision was taken to rent the building?
Well, let's put it this way. The department in the government that does government rentals would have taken that on board. But then there's security and there's security and there's other security. Right?
What does that mean?
Well, it means that security means different things to different people. Because security doesn't only mean that I move around this country as Prime Minister. My security is always important to me and the state. And the officers who look after me, they don't just look after me here in the office. Because security requires, if somebody wants to hurt you, they can hurt you anyway. So, what I'm saying, this matter is a matter which required a decision. And the decision maker was the cabinet, which got a building, which up to that point of its rental, passed muster. And then if they come back and say, look, we need to do so and so with the building, cabinet never stood in the way of that. That's why so much time had passed, because we had to do certain things to bring it to a certain standard according to security arrangements. But then, if you get to the point where it is said that no further improvements can be made, and I mean, in hindsight, now you could say, well, maybe we should have done all of this before, but this was never the overriding consideration. Some of this is new.
Also, as a matter of government policy, do you think it is wise to invest like $45 million in a building that the government itself doesn't own?
Well, you see, rental is something like that. The government has requirements now for a lot of space to conduct public service. The government doesn't own enough buildings to put all those people in. So over time, the government will rent and also add building stock. But if you rent, you have to pay market rates. Nobody's going to give you their building for free. They're going to give you that market rate. So a building like that, which, as I said, there is an executive office, high standard, high quality building. It used to be the head office of a bank, right? And that building would carry a certain, the rental is not going to be cheap. I think it's $600,000 a month you pay in there. And it is a building which was deemed to be suitable at a point in time. And the whole question of its suitability, I am not a security expert, but of course the taxpayer who pays the bill ought to be aware of how this thing happened and why it happened. Right? I mean, as I told you a while ago, we could have abandoned here, because somebody said it was unsafe for the Prime Minister to come in here.
So are you suggesting, therefore, that there could have been a decision to enter the building with all the constraints identified?
I don't want, you see, I didn't, after I spoke last week, Thursday, I didn't want to get any running commentary going on this matter, because I know it would be grist for people's mill. So I would not stand here and make any assessment or critique of the security recommendation, except to say that a recommendation coming to the cabinet or going to the government or its agency would be treated as such a recommendation, right? And
and see if you can outfit it to his standards.
if what?
If you can outfit it to his needs and his standards. Are you willing to do that now as a government, the cabinet?
I wouldn't answer that question because I don't know what his standard is. I don't know what his standard is. What I do know is that a building is available that has queries. Those queries were addressed and further queries arise. And I would leave that for the Attorney General who talks to the DPP and the government department that deals with rentals and so on. I'm not going to step into that. But the fact that we've gone the mile to get accommodation for the DPP's office puts the lie to the conversation that one, the government did nothing, and two, that the government is after the DPP. I want you to dispense with those two things. Okay?
Prime Minister, good afternoon. If, through the Attorney General, the Cabinet gets any further detailed recommendations from the DPP, would that be taken into consideration?
The Cabinet is always open. I said to you earlier today, contrary to all the sayings that went on the last week from all the sages, that the government has no issue with the DPP doing his job, and the Cabinet will do whatever the Cabinet can do to make it easier for the DPP to function. Because we don't need a lecture as to the importance of the role of the DPP in the society, in the dispensing of justice, in the protection and security of the state. So we know that. If there's anything that is reasonable that can be done, and we thought we've done that. That's why I mentioned it.
Also, in light of the points you made earlier about rentals by the government and buildings fit for purpose, such as the new Ministry of Health building, given the nature of the operations of the DPP's office, would consideration be given to a building being built fit for purpose for the DPP as opposed to renting office space?
Well, that is not in front of us today. It might be in front of us going down the road, but the whole question is that we weren't looking to build a building, because that takes time. You rent in the interim. So I don't know, maybe sometime that may happen. But renting buildings for government offices is standard practice. We try to minimize it, and we try to get the best rates. Because building a building also costs a lot of money. And this is how, you know, in the case of the education, the health building, it's being built in a private-public partnership where the government didn't put out the money, right? They provided the land, but we're going to get a building, I think, looking at probably June or something like that. And then you stop paying all the rent around, and the rental money goes towards paying the financing of that building. So these are arrangements that are made. But again, this is the cabinet responsibility, doing those things. So if you have urgent need for space, in most instances you may rent until you build. I think that is the best answer I can give you.
Also, you made an announcement, a discussion you had with the Attorney General concerning the possibility of attorneys from abroad, special attorneys from abroad, being part of the DPP's office in Trinidad under a contractual arrangement.
Yes.
But that the AG will have to discuss with the DPP. Has that conversation taken place?
To the best of my knowledge, that is underway. To the best of my knowledge, that is underway. And that is still an option that we're going to pursue once, no obstacles come in the way.
Is the model similar to that? I'm just asking for clarification. Is the model similar to what we see, let's say, in the United States? We have a special prosecutor or something different?
No, not special prosecutor. It's just adding to the staff. And because the DPP staff, especially on major matters, because whenever the state loses a matter, it's a serious loss. Even a small case that it look like a small matter, the state losing usually has far-reaching consequences. So the DPP, as the state's prosecutor, has to have quality representation in the courts. And those people, you don't pick them up off the streets in Trinidad and Tobago. I've seen it said that the office needs 150 lawyers. Come on, if you advertise tomorrow for 150 lawyers fit for the DPP office to prosecute criminal matters, what do you think you're going to get? And if you do get them, What quality are you going to get? So, but you can, if you look at a wider pool of people, you can, hopefully, we are expecting, even people who are retired from, or recently retired people, might be available for a year or two on contract to bring the quality of service that the DPP needs immediately. Because we talk about training, we talk about staff development and so on. Those things take time in an office that has a huge turnover of staff. So these are all, but I didn't go into those matters at all, and I don't want to be seen to be going. I left those where they belong, in the judiciary. And I focused myself on where the cabinet had a role to play, because I'm sure had I not spoken than last 2 Thursdays ago, you would have been asking, or it would have been said that the cabinet know the DPP wanted office space and didn't do anything about it, which wasn't going to be a correct statement, right? So I spoke up front saying that yes, the cabinet knows, the cabinet did certain things, it has not worked out for certain reasons. That's all it was. And of course, my friends on the other side in the parliament saw the opportunity, once again, to try and get their friends not to go to court and answer the charges, raising all kinds of red hair and talking all kind of rubbish, making all kinds of accusations, and putting, hopefully, I hope that the DPP is sufficiently intelligent to let all that nonsense bounce off his ears and ignore the supporters of criminal conduct in this country. I find it very strange indeed that the majority of people who came out in this contrived way, the DPP is under attack, so let's go and defend him from the Prime Minister. Most of them have criminal problems with the DPP office. And I call that attempting to curry favor with the DPP. Because if you know your name in a file in front of the DPP, but you're out front fabricating stories about his imminent demise, you're trying to curry favor. And that goes for the opposition leader and all of them. Right? Hoping that, a buying company? No. We in the PNM, we in the government of Trinidad and Tobago, we are not playing favorites and we're not out of fear. The DPP is going to do his job without fear or favor, facilitated by what the cabinet can do. There are different areas of responsibility, and finally I want to say, in this situation, the best that can happen for the people of Trinidad and Tobago is for all of us in these various offices to buckle down and do our jobs and ignore the UNC and their particular problem.
To the question just quickly, but you also have in Trinidad and Tobago senior counsel with experience in various matters. Is that also something in terms of the DPP? So you have persons coming from abroad, but you also have senior counsel in Trinidad who may be able to assist the DPP. I'm sure some already have done that.
There is that too, but let's get realistic. One of the things in the judicial system is something called conflict. The DPP is on one side representing the state. On the other side is the criminal and all their friends. A lot of the lawyers work for the criminals, and therefore cannot at the same time, in the same matter, work for the DPP. And I'm not even here discussing the financial considerations, which are more lucrative, depending on who your client is, right? So the pool of people available, especially with the demands being made on the state, the pool is not large, right? So if you really want to get something done, with some fierce urgency, you really have to look at a broader field, and that is what the Attorney General is doing now. And this is not, so these are the realities. But what I really don't want to happen in the country is for us to go down the road of fabricated anger. Let us be reasonable. This country has too many schools, too many universities for people who should not be guided in narrative to be able to throw out that kind of, stories that are fabricated for whatever reason, and that becomes the national narrative. You mentioned the PNM platform. There's a lot we're going to say on the PNM platform, because on the PNM platform, that is where we believe, right, that the public story can be told without hindrance, without embellishment, right? Yes, Anthony.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. I would like to ask you a question about your office, yourself, and the DPP. It relates to a statement that you made on July the 1st, 2016, which was almost 7 years ago. That statement relates to the report of the Coleman Commission of Inquiry that you had received days before that. You told Parliament on July the 1st, 2016 that you had had a discussion with Cabinet and the decision was taken to pass that report to the Director of Public Prosecution. Are you satisfied that the office holder has done enough in 6 years and close to 7 years, and with the office holder having received millions of dollars, the process of finding the truth of Clico, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars has been spent on that. Are you satisfied that the Office of the DPP has done enough with that Coleman Commission of Inquiry document?
Well, in this evening's interaction with you, I made the point that no one can point to any instance where the government, its spokespersons, Prime Minister or others, have been taking issue with the way the DPP has done its job. You're asking me to change that today. You were going very good when you raised the matter, but when you're asking me for my opinion, I'm not going to give an opinion like that. Because if I give an opinion like that, the next thing I know is that they will say, you see, you're attacking DPP. My opinion, I will keep to myself for the Cabinet. But what I would say though, I'm glad you mentioned that because these are historical facts. Because I've seen you people in the media again, seeing the opposition, carrying opposition member statement that the Prime Minister has swept under the carpet the Coleman report. And he did so to protect his friends. You seen that? You print that? Unchallenged. You know there was a Coleman inquiry in this country. It was done on live television. People were cross-examined. It went on for weeks, if not months, and it cost many tens of millions of dollars. You know that? And then we waited for the Coleman report. By that time, I was Prime Minister. It didn't start under me. When I became Prime Minister, the Coleman report was outstanding. Then Coleman put his report in to the Prime Minister of Trinidad and Tobago. I took that report to the Cabinet, informed the Cabinet that we have this report. The Cabinet did not adjudicate on the report, its content. The Cabinet cleared that the report be laid in Parliament and that the DPP, and I think the AG office as well, it was sent to the DPP because it was a report that had criminal repercussions. So I sent it to the DPP, expecting he has a copy, and I think, if my memory serves me right, a copy went to the Attorney General's office again. I think so. But I was on my way to the Parliament because this was a report of a matter that was ventilated live on television with lawyers for all people cross-examining, and Coleman put the document of his final position to the court. When I got to the Parliament with it, I was not able to lay it in the Parliament because I received advice from the DPP telling me in writing that I should not lay it in the Parliament because to do so would interfere with the criminal proceedings that he was pursuing. Now, as a responsible Prime Minister, if I get that advice or that heads up from the DPP, there was nothing stopping me as Prime Minister from laying it in the Parliament. Because I don't know of any law that says that I cannot lay it in the Parliament. If as Prime Minister, I think it should be laid. But as a responsible Prime Minister, getting that heads up from the Director of Public Prosecution, I took that an advisement and did not lay the report in the Parliament. What I did, I did a very curtailed summary to inform the public that the report had been had, that it is comprehensive, and that it makes allegations against persons and recommendations for criminal prosecution. That's all I did. And how long ago was that?
July 1st, 2016.
Right. And I have never said anything about it or about the DPP's performance of his job. Is that true?
That is true.
Right. So then it falls in what I've been saying, that our government in Trinidad and Tobago, with respect to dealing with the DPP's office, there is no instance where the government has been hostile to the DPP on civil or on criminal matters, whether this one or any other.
Yes, but Prime Minister, you also said earlier this afternoon that your government has a real interest in going after white-collar crime. Here you have a report from an independent jurist having dealt with thousands of pages of evidence. Nothing seems to have come of it.
Well, but it is where it belongs. The government cannot now add pages to that. The government would have paid the bills for it to happen. The government would have provided the support. It is now, there can be no criminal pursuit of anybody without the police and the DPP. So once it gets there, there's no further role for the government as you know it, meaning the executive. It got there. So I, like everybody else, I have to wait for the departments to function. And we have scrupulously kept our distance from those departments where the footprint of the cabinet is not to be seen. And instead of getting credit for that, you have miscreants like the opposition group telling a completely different story. I mean, I saw it on many occasions where my parliamentary colleagues have been saying, accusing me personally of hiding the Coleman report. And they would have known, because I stood in front of them in the parliament and said, we've got the report. It was the government's intention to lay it in the parliament, but the DPP's officers said, don't do that because it will interfere with the criminal proceedings.
Do you regret taking the DPP's advice?
Anthony Wilson. My regrets are not for the public record. Yes, Ria.
To take up Anthony's point, the fact is that the Clipper collapse took place in 2009. So we are 24 years later with nothing so far. And I want to link this to the general sense in the population that nothing, despite all the talk about corruption, whether it's live sport, whether it's prison gate, nothing is happening.
Yes.
Do you think that there is a problem of independent office holders being immune from accountability in the face of, a certain measure of concern that may be in the society, may be within the government, maybe within wherever, that there is a tendency to just take the position that, okay, you can't interfere, we are independent, and if you raise questions, everybody's going to say, oh, you want to interfere or you want to get involved. Or how do we get accountability in the face of what I see to be this?
Accountability has to be a widespread requirement. It's not going to come by talking about a department or an individual, because a lot of people would be involved before we get accountability. Because a lot of what is happening in our country, I don't think it pleases most people where it comes to justice in these matters. And unfortunately, what we have seen is that some people put themselves in a position to be even viewed to be above the law. But it's not.
Can we find the capacity or the mechanism to hold people to account who have been, by virtue of the Constitution and so on, been given a certain protection?
Well, those are deep allegations. I don't know protection. I would say running interference, because what I see is that people run interference for other people in our systems, right? Like how the UNC cabinet went to Parliament and do Section 34, running interference to benefit somebody. An Attorney General goes before the court and tell the court, don't let the extradition proceed after years of playing in the court, because it's got, and of course you have, there was one situation where a prominent person in the country was before the police, and the DPP gave advice to the police, go look at the Customs Act. I never heard that they went and come back, right? So there's a failing, a deep failing across the board. And I must tell you though, from the government looking out through the window at this, you saw what was put in the editorial in the Guardian? That the government had investment in Ramlogan and Ramdeen case. That's what the press would print in our country, right? And then give the impression and stating that the Prime Minister was annoyed, when in fact the conversation should be whether in fact the truth is having its day in the court. And you know, I'm in no different position to the rest of the country, where we are impatient with respect to the delivery of justice. Some people have taken the position. The average criminal in this country takes a position. The first thing you tell I'm a lawyer. Why? And then you go to court. They say, take me to court. You know why? Because there's a lack of functioning in these areas, and the criminals know it. And what we have to do is do what we have to do to ensure that people can't evade justice in the way that they've been doing, and that justice is dispensed in a speedier fashion. But there are people in our system, in our country, who run interference for criminals. And in fact, like now, some of the criminals are heroes. They're heroes. I don't want to stand here and call any names, but you know all of it, you know all of them. I mean, look, last week I was a gag when I see who calling press conference to be defending the DPP. From what? From the Prime Minister and from the PNM. The very people who know that they are subject of DPP interests. And I must say, members of the media, you have a serious role to play in dissecting this and presenting it in bite-sized version for the population to understand. That go to hairballing for the water there. Now you want it. Yes.
Prime Minister, do you agree that in the 61 years almost of Trinidad and Tobago's independence, no quote-unquote big fish with regard to white-collar crime has been taken down? And would you not agree that that, let's call it fact, has consequences for the prevalence of white-collar crime in this country?
Absolutely. Well, if somebody is coming to work late and the manager does not do anything about it, you have one latecomer. By the end of the week, you might have two. Because who came on time saying, but I could come a little later? And then by the end of the year, you have 10. And before you know it, the department is a department that is known for latecomers. That's what it is. And I have no different position to you, Anthony, on this matter. Our system has not discouraged. On the contrary, I regret to say, it has encouraged white-collar criminal conduct. Let me tell you about a particular situation that it irks me. There was a situation inside the parliament of Trinidad and Tobago, where a staff member used his station to steal money inside the parliament. We were made aware of it. We knew who the person was, and nothing has happened about it. That is policing a situation that is known. It's not an unknown person who committed the crime. I know of another situation where in the private sector, an officer stole $5 million from a business house. And that business house has been trying to get the fraud squad interested in prosecuting that matter and cannot get. And you know how I know it? Because they complain to me. What can I do? I run the fraud squad. And the person actually wrote an admission for stealing the money. So I can tell you, Anthony, I know these frustrations because I live here. But what is frightening is that office holders, like the opposition leader and her cohorts, are trying to normalize that situation in Trinidad and Tobago. Feeling sorry for persons who are before the court, promoting them, advancing them into the parliament. What do you think it does to the criminal element in this country when they see a man in parliament on $1 million bail? What do you think it does to them? What do you think young people in school would think when they're coming up in this country? You know, well, if they lock me up and I want bail, I will still get my job. What is that? What is that? We had a chairman of a corporation here charged for bribery, and he was still allowed to chair the corporation. In Sandingani, another one was charged for bribery. He was running the tenders committee in the corporation. Those are standards that the population must reject out of hand.
Yes, but Prime Minister, you are the leader of the government. You are first among equals.
Really? In the cabinet. And you, Anthony, and the media and the country, you want me as far as possible away from prosecuting anybody. So don't carry me down that road. I know the executive is stopped from going down that road. Once the matter is a police matter and the police is involved, right? I will tell you worse than that. There was a murder in this country. A murder. There's a witness. The witness went to a member of my government and told the member. The member went to the police. The police turn up. The criminal turn up by the witness door. They say, you go and tell the police about me. And the next thing I know, the country was being stained because he left the country and made himself a victim in another country. Bad talking Trinidad and Tobago. Having run from that situation. I tell you all very frequently that in the office of Prime Minister, a lot of information resides. But it's not everything that comes here I can talk about. I know this country. I know about this country. And the last thing that I can tell you, this government is not going to protect wrongdoing, and we are not going to be shying away from pursuing it, but there's a limit to what the executive can do because of the nature. We in order to get our independence, we agreed to some arrangements that are inimical to good order and brought obsolescence to management arrangements. In the government that I lead, there was one instance where an officer was using the office to remove money into a family member's account. We complained to the relevant authority, who did nothing. Eventually, after we complained, something was done. And the next thing we know, the officer is back in the job. So, let me not say half of what I know in this country.
Minister, before you go along, one question and a request. The question is, given all that you have said, all the lackery that's out there with the DPP's office and whatnot, are you of the view that the criminal justice system has collapsed?
No, it has not collapsed. It has challenges, and the challenges are not beyond us. And I'm saying today, what I expect to happen from here going forward is that all the entities involved, agencies and individuals, will buckle down, face facts, face the truth, and get on with the job to the satisfaction and in the interest of the wider national community.
And my request is, could you ask of the AG to have a press conference, preferably not tomorrow because I'm off. I'm on Monday.
You are free to talk to the AG is a very affable person. I'm sure he'll want to talk to you anytime that is convenient. He's busy. Yes, Anthony again.
I just want to ask you, you mentioned it earlier, what do you think of the fact that the accused in the Piarco airport matter, some of them have gone to jail in the United States, served their sentence, and have come out? Others have paid back money to, as you told us today, others have paid back money to Trinidad and Tobago. What do you think about a system in which some accused in the same Piarco matter, well, let me put it this way, that none of the accused in the Piarco matter who have been before the Trinidad and Tobago courts over a 20-year period have been served with the kind of justice that those who are accused in the United States courts have faced. What do you think of that situation?
Well, in Trinidad and Tobago, what passes is unsatisfactory, and in the United States, it's done with great expedition. I mean, I told you this afternoon that in that same Piarco matter, there's a matter going on right now with some of the same people. And if you look at that, the judge has laid down, and how I know this is that the former Attorney General is the country representative in that matter and is a witness. So the cabinet had to give permission for him to travel out of the country and support him. So I happen to know that. The judge has set, I think it was the 3rd of March to the 21st of March, or the 25th of March. And the judge has said that and said, this matter will be done in this period. And it's interesting enough, during that period, today the 24th, 23rd, during this period, as I'm monitoring it from a distance, the judge on many occasions had to make a ruling because consistently there will be motions to delay, to abridge, to throw out, and the judge has to rule. That is not how our system functions. I work with my television on all the time. It's a habit I developed at university. I study with the radio all the time, and I work with the television on all the time. So I follow sometimes the American system, where a crime is committed. You look at the work, you see the arraignment, you see the person, you see the case set down, and you see the end of it. You just mentioned Clico. Compare that with Enron. Right? And you know, since we're talking, I met, as Prime Minister, someone came up to me and raised with me the issue of payment before the Coleman matter had been completed and brought to the government. Someone came to me and raised with me in my capacity as Prime Minister that the payment was not being made and the billings were not being paid. And I asked, what's it about? And it was Clico. And at that time, the billing that was being raised at me in the street, or close to the street, was $30-something million. And they had already received $75 million. And I asked, what have you done for this? What have we received for this payment? And he said, well, we've read, I think it's 30 million pages. So I said, but I wasn't aware they hire you to read every page in Clico. I thought you were pursuing a particular matter. And then I was a little annoyed at being approached in that way. However, soon after that, well, the cabinet was taking the position, do we continue paying this money? Where is it going to end? I just mentioned 35 million plus 75 million. That was then. What does the cabinet do? Well, we got advice. The DPP's office said, if you don't pay the money, well, pay the money. Because if you don't pay the money, that is tantamount to you ending the criminal investigation. So you pay the money. And if you ask me where it's gone since then, I don't know. But the bottom line, we comply with the law. We don't interfere with the law. We just we comply. Because I didn't want it said that the government, by not paying this bill, ended that inquiry that you were so interested in. But I tell you something. We had an inquiry into Jack Warner and his conduct at the stadium. It was a commission of inquiry. It was going on, and there was no end in sight. And the cabinet, the Manning cabinet, we had to take a decision to just end it. Because there was nothing being produced, and we were paying out money with no prospect of anything coming out of it. And the Manning cabinet, of which I was a part, we took the decision to end this, and that is how the inquiry into the stadium. The stadium was damaged, tickets were fraudulently handled and so on, and of course the beneficiaries of that end up as Prime Minister of the country. So let's not fool ourselves. We have serious issues to address, and that is why I'm not going to allow the UNC to tell lies about the facts of this country. And I speak to you like this, not as Prime Minister, but as a citizen. That is what is going on. I probably told you all too many things today. I tell you one more thing. We have 10,000 police officers in this country. About 9,999 are good people. Right? But we have a lot of people in the systems. And they will tell you that the Prime Minister, me, tell the authorities in the Coast Guard, in the Defense Force, in the police service, I've been telling them all along, if you have people in these agencies who are falling short where corruption is concerned or any kind of misconduct that is seriously threatening the standards that you require to be, get them out. Let them go to the court and complain. If they succeed in the court, more power to them, but at least they're not there undermining the country. During the days of COVID, when we used to have the curfew, there were people advertising curfew nights, where you could come in 9 o'clock and leave 5 o'clock for a fee. And if you leave before, a different fee. And they will supply you with goods inside and drinks. Set up brothels all over the country, advertising that. As head of national security of this country, National Security Council, I called in the police and said, that needs your attention. I was told they arranged the night shift, the all-night shift for the ladies started at 9 o'clock for $500 a room. And the police did what they had to do, and they were going there at 10 o'clock to each door at 10 o'clock. Everything was in place. Defense Force police went. They didn't hold one person. That night, not one person was in the hotels. Everyone was empty. The only person who was there was the secretary by the gate, by the counter. That is Trinidad and Tobago at work. Understand? So let us understand the nature of our country and the nature of the problem we're dealing with, because a lot of you will sympathize and have sympathy and have become bleeding hearts for people who get rooted out from these situations, not realizing the damage that they're doing to the country.
But how do we change the situation?
You fix the problems 1 by 1, 2 by 2, 3 by 3, or 4 by 4. That's what this government is doing.
Because is the system flawed? That are you saying?
You sound like you were listening to my friend. I heard my friend Bazio Pandi saying that yesterday. But what exactly in the Constitution you want to change? Until you tell me what aspect of the Constitution you want to reform and what the reform is going to be, I can't answer you. Because that catch-all phrase of Constitution reform, right? Constitution reform. What exactly are you going to reform? I know what I'm saying when I say that. Because I say this whole question of this super independence of independent service commissions is something that needs to be looked at in the modern Trinidad and Tobago. It has created models that are inimical to good order, and it damages management. Right? But we didn't have the trust in ourselves in 1962 that we ring-fence all these things in these commissions, many of which are not properly suited. I mean, we can, that's for another time, right? But today I can tell you, when I speak about reform of the Constitution, that's what I'm talking about from my prescription. But when people just say, well, okay, the police is not functioning, I heard somebody ask, how could the DPP have been protected from the Prime Minister in this scenario that they've created? And he said, reform of the Constitution. What does that mean? I have no recommendation to make to change the DPP's authority. The DPP's authority about being able to prescribe and prefer charges against people against whom evidence has been advanced. I don't want to change that. I don't want to change the power to get into a matter and end it because it's seen to be a travesty. But between those two positions, the day-to-day operations of offices, not just the DPP, it is the general order of things in the country.
It's not your job to make it easier.
Yeah, right. It's my job.
It's
my job.
For example,
my job is the job of Prime Minister. And the Prime Minister's job has limits to what you can do. But you impact on a number of things. And even when you don't impact it, you're accused of impacting it. Look what I'm being accused of today. I preserve that independence, that distance between me and the DPP office. And look what the opposition leader is telling the world. Look where the president has gone into office instead of giving her the support that you will give her to do the best for all of us. Because my grandmother told me, and I believe it, if good comes, it comes for all of us. And if bad comes, it comes for all of us too. So instead of doing that, you go on talking about the president was selected by the Prime Minister and disrespectfully talks about the president is there to be the Prime Minister's handmaiden to give pardon to Nelson. That is the kind of rubbish that passes for discourse in Trinidad and Tobago from somebody who was your Prime Minister and is now your opposition leader, wanted to become Prime Minister again. What is the future of the country in that kind of old talk? And you know, I've been around too long in this business to be now talking about looking for popularity contests. Right? I'm kind of too old for that now. But it's time that we talk sense in this place, because people who don't know us talk what they don't know about, and those who are maliciously speaking in self-protection in the criminal area, them is people to watch. Thank you very much.